Great. Cool. Well, thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you. I just skimmed the email you sent. Let's see, how long ago was that? Things get back. Well, not too far, not too long ago.
Sorry, it just broke up a second.
Oh, okay. I just skimmed the email you sent me.
Oh,
Wasn't too long ago.
no, it wasn't. No, but
Well, why don't you now? Yeah, I know you introduced yourself in the email. I'm recording this, and you don't have to post it, of course, but I'll send it to you after we're done.
yeah, sure.
And why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to me, and let's go from there.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I live in Gardnerville, Nevada. Originally from California, though. Grew up in a kind of a tiny, small town up there. Grew up small farm. Yeah, had some cows and some sheep, and
Really wonderful.
Yeah,
you grew up in not the urban California, the other California.
Yeah. The county I grew up in actually is one of two counties that has less than 10,000 people in California. Yeah. So I did that, and then I went to school in Reading and studied theology there, and then moved to the Bay Area to go to seminary. Went to Fuller's Extension campus there, and started working at a pretty big church down there, and then moved to Gardnerville last November. Yeah, so it's been fun.
Well, what are your, although you grew up in, I mean, a lot of people don't understand that there's kind of urban California, and then there's really rural California. There's places in California where you just drive and drive and drive and nobody's around.
Yeah. That was the thing that when I lived in the Bay Area, I think that was one of the things that I kept telling people, because I met a lot of people who just moved to the Bay Area, and they're like, "Oh, this is California. California's great." I said, "No, you go about 50 miles inland, and it's very different."
Yeah.
I mean, politically,
Yes.
where I grew up, you wouldn't see a Hillary or Obama sticker during any of the last election campaigns, but in the Bay Area, it's obviously, completely the polar opposite.
Yep. I just got finished talking to a guy who grew up and lived in the Bay Area, and we were talking just about that.
Yeah.
So then you went to college up in Reading and studied theology, and then you did Fuller Extension, then you worked in a church. And are you working in a church now, or?
No, actually, I'm actually working in construction right now.
Okay. So church, you worked in a church long enough to know you didn't want to work in a church.
I wouldn't say quite like that. It was maybe I needed a break.
Okay.
A break.
How long did you work in the church before you needed a break?
4.5 years.
Oh, that's a pretty good run.
Yeah.
Working you were on staff at a large church?
Yeah, it was a large church, a large mega church, and for the most part, I really enjoyed the parts of it.
Good.
But then there was other things. I just realized I'm not part of that. In the mega church world, you end up with this whole corporate culture, and I'm more of a small church guy. And so about last July, I think it was, I kind of started having this intuition that which I felt was the Spirit. This just said, hey, to do ministry, you don't need to be paid by a church. And so I started kind of thinking well, maybe for now, maybe I won't work in a church. Maybe it'll turn into something bivocational a little bit down the road, and then maybe even I will probably be back on staff at a church sometime in my future, I think.
It's it's the church business, if we could call it that.
Yeah.
The church has the middle has kind of been squeezed out of the churches. Mm-hmm. So there are many, many, many tiny little churches, of which I pastor one. And I'm fortunate to be able to work full time at a church that I that I pastor, a small enough church.
Yeah.
And then there's the mega churches. But you're right, the mega churches, there is a corporate, once you get to a certain size, the patterns of how society manages people impose themselves, and even the legal situation imposes itself, so that you have to do it in certain ways. And I remember, working with a denomination, so that denominational entity, it's not really like the church, it's more like a business, and there are sides to that. But if you're going to work in the church, at least depending on the tradition, you're either going to maybe work bivocationally and scrimp and try and get by in a tiny little church, or you're going to be in this corporate environment. And there's something that sort of, the corporate environment and church work, it's not an easy fit.
Yeah, no, it's not. And that was kind of one of the things I realized is I went in there thinking like I want to be a pastor, but I felt most of the time like a kind of a glorified administrator. And so I was just kind of like, and plus the Bay Area was just getting a little too crazy for me, just in terms of the busyness and stuff. So me and my wife, we decided to take a risk and just try something new. And
So you're thinking, did you already have some of these skills? You studied theology at your college, so because sometimes when people get out of ministry, it's really tough because they don't have any other skills.
Well, for me, I think it's lucky because I'm still kind of young. So But I growing up, I learned a lot of I learned how to work manually, and then at the church. I was there for 4.5 years, but actually, for the first couple of years there, while I was going to seminary, I was one of their facilities guys. So I learned a lot there.
Okay.
Yeah. And
so you're not without practical skills. That's a good thing.
It is, yeah. And that was kind of something that I was thinking of when I made that decision, is like, well, I'd like to develop some other skills.
So how was it for you and your wife looking for a church, going church shopping? Did you find a church that you're satisfied with, or? Yeah.
We're going to a non-denominational church, something that we found and felt was, pretty close to what we were like. It's kind of an interesting thing, sort of where I've landed theologically. I sometimes I get a little uncomfortable with like the real conservative, fundamentalist type of church, but I'm also definitely not a liberal.
Yeah.
So one of the things is when in a smaller community like this, you tend to either get either extreme, right? The Episcopal church with like 10 people going to it, or the
the evangelical church,
fire and brimstone. But we found a good place that we like.
Okay. And somewhere along the line, you must have found Jordan Peterson, because you're talking to me, and that's how people usually find me.
Yes. I found Jordan Peterson. I actually started when he released his first video. I started following him not too long after that. I remember I was reading something online and that referenced him about political correctness or something, and I'd been doing, that was 2016, so I was doing a lot of thinking about privilege and things like identity politics, because in some of my classes at Fuller, Fuller's a great place, but there was sort of some of those influences of that left-wing postmodern thought, and so I was kind of trying to figure out what I thought about it. And then I came across Jordan Peterson. I started watching some of his stuff on Jung and Viktor Frankl, Freud, and I just started watching everything that came out. And then I was thinking like, wow, well, this is really cool. I don't know where he is theologically, but he's doing theology in a very real sense. And then I found your channel. Thought, oh wow, this is great. Someone is talking about it from a Christian perspective, exploring some of the theological themes. So I've really been enjoying kind of your commentary on it, and it's given me a lot of good food for thought.
So did you have to shut the door and turn down the volume in your church job when you're listening to Jordan Peterson, or?
Sometimes. Sometimes luckily I had headphones, so I get to listen to Jordan Peterson.
Really, it's Tim Keller. It's not Jordan Peterson.
Yeah. No, actually, I was lucky there in that the church that I worked at was very open intellectually. That was what they were really liked. I think actually, weirdly enough, once I started listening to Jordan Peterson, I started becoming more conservative, I think. And as we, especially in the Bay Area, talking about those issues, and Jordan Peterson's thoughts started really kind of informing how I would think about those things. When we would have someone would be like, well, we need to do diversity training for everyone or whatever. Jordan Peterson kind of gave me some tools. I guess I was more resistant to some of those things. Never got me in trouble or anything, but sometimes say like, well, I don't know if this is the best way of addressing some of these issues. But Jordan Peterson was great. In fact, I'd occasionally teach a Sunday school, not a Sunday school class, a Wednesday morning class for the seniors at the church. And I never said his name, but some of his stuff from the Bible lectures definitely made its way into there. No, somebody do.
Yeah, I'm guilty of that too. Sometimes people watch my stuff and they're like, "There's Jordan Peterson stuff in there." Of course, there's Jordan Peterson stuff in there. It's coming out of the same head. Right. I listen to guys like Jordan Peterson and Tim Keller, and I read books because I wanna learn and bounce things off and discover things. So that's why you do it. It's ongoing education.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I became kind of an apologist for him around there when I would have conversations with people, other staff members, or even congregants, and they would say, they'd say, oh, what are you reading? Or say, well, I've been listening to this, and you should check it out. And I had quite a few people tell me like, oh man, this is awesome. So I became an evangelist for that there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's on your mind? What's on your list to talk about? Everybody's got a list. So
yeah. Well, I wanted to talk to you, I guess, a little bit about the idea of Jordan Peterson as a liberal theologian, because that was kind of one of the conclusions I came to. I don't know whether I doubt he would accept that label, but as I was listening to him and I was listening to Bible lectures, seeing how he did his theology, and I was trying to think like, okay, what is this? I started thinking, this actually sounds a lot like certain liberal thinkers I read. Last summer I was rereading Paul Tillich's The Courage to Be, and I thought, oh my gosh, like this could be Jordan Peterson in a different time. I don't think he wasn't ever as popular, I don't think. And he definitely wasn't as clear. But I noticed they both have, and with liberal theology in general, this desire to improve people's lives and thereby improve society without necessarily carrying all the metaphysical baggage that more orthodox Christianity would have. Yeah.
I agree 100%. Peterson's really funny because he's got all of these streams in him. And so, I mean, liberal theology, so what happens after the Enlightenment is that there's there's this sense that the traditional church is slowly retreating, and there's a tremendous amount of fear that, well, we've got all these sunk costs into Christianity, we have to somehow save it. So much theology for the last 200 plus years has been written as a way to save Christianity from secularism. And so to reframe, I mean, Schleiermacher, just go through the list of classical liberal theology. This is exactly what they're doing. And what's interesting about Peterson is he's not even Barth with neo-orthodoxy, an attempt to, regain what had been lost, to re-justify, because obviously through the catastrophe of the Second World War and the catastrophe of the church's performance in that crisis, that, to fail, with the exception of some like Bonhoeffer, but even Bonhoeffer's neo-orthodox. So I think you're very right, except that Peterson, whereas Barth or Tillich or any of these often German theologians, Schleiermacher, these guys, they're trying to save Christianity and save the church, which is what, liberal churches do. Peterson comes along and he's not trying to save the church. The church is incidental, if not problematic. He's trying to save, the daughter of the church, which is Western post-Christian Christendom. So I think you're very much right on that. And that's what's so interesting about Peterson, because that's very much a piece of him. He is doing liberal theology, but in a way that many in the Episcopal Church would have a real problem with, because they're all doing woke theology now.
And that's the thing. It's like because so much liberal theology right now allies itself with kind of a far left social agenda. It's out of touch with what I think most people are at. And I think that's a good point that you brought up. I think there's a subtext. Well, so Peterson, I think, ends up bringing people into the church, whereas liberal theology tends to, even though it's trying to save the church, it ends up really like shrinking churches. Because underneath a lot of liberal theology is the subtext of, you don't need the church, actually, but we still want you to come. And so the people will say, okay, well, if we can't trust the Bible, everything is contextual, we need to, not get too close with some of those earlier beliefs or those fundamentalists or whatever. What it ends up coming down to is, why should I get up at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning and go to church? For Peterson, since church isn't really part of his thing, he actually ends up doing kind of this, working with the same framework as a lot of liberal theology, but he approaches it different. Instead of saying, you can't trust the Bible like those ignorant fundamentalists do, he says, well, let's just look at the Bible psychologically, and there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. So he manages to pull people who are just interested in that stuff, and then they end up finding their way in, which is interesting. So his way of kind of drawing people in, or more towards Christianity, is ironically, it's only possible because he stands outside of that tradition, which is weird.
Well, and it's also, so again, liberal theology was an attempt to save the institution of the church. Peterson has no such project. I mean, and so I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Bishop Barron, because, I mean, to me, Bishop Barron, from what I've seen of him, represents some of the best of the Roman Catholic Church. He's educated, he's pastoral, he's sharp. I mean, the dude's got gifts all over the place. And so what a wonderful guy to talk to. But Peterson is doing this. And so I haven't gotten the second session back from the conference I did in Australia, but part of my thesis for that second talk was essentially what happened with Darwin was that in the middle of the 19th century, Darwin convinced a lot of people they didn't need God in order to explain the world, the physical stuff of the world. And that's, sort of God number one, God of general revelation. Peterson comes along and basically says, well, okay, let's assume you don't need God to explain the existence of things. And he's pretty coy about that. If you listen to a few places where he talks about it. But he goes on to say basically, but you can't really go on without the idea of God and have us work psychologically and socially. We need that layer in order to deal with consciousness and consciousness as a sorting of the world. And so in a funny way, he reconstitutes the need for God that Darwin dispelled. And so you still will continue, I think, let's think about Jordan Peterson's church. Jordan Peterson's church would sort of be like a liberal church in that, are you going to, so if I get another chance to talk to Jordan Peterson, and if the conversation is the right context, I'd probably challenge him on, hey, mythopoetic guy, what about ritual? You talk a lot about sacrifice. Don't you think that maybe building the altar and laying the animal, don't you think that in an embodied sense, that sacrifice is pretty important? I mean, because that's the cultic aspect. And so he, in a sense, like liberal Christianity, wants to, revivify some of this stuff, but he's not looking for the cultic aspect of it. And so his 12 rules for life, in many ways, I think you're dead on right here, is classic liberal literature because it doesn't need the cult. And when I say cult, I don't mean, Jim Jones. I mean, what I mean technically in the theological sense, the cultic aspect of it, where we perform ritual. And which is really ironic because then you've got a guy like John Vervaeke who is all about the play and the ritual and the embodiment, but he's a secularist essentially. Then of course you've got Peugeot over here who is full-blown orthodoxy where, hey, we've got the ritual, we've got the liturgy, we've got the cult. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right. It's really interesting there. And he, I even thought like when he does answer the questions, and I just watched a couple of his videos he released over the weekend about belief in God. But overall, I thought like that is such a classic liberal theological answer is, well, what do you mean by God? He obviously wouldn't be comfortable using the language of Trinity. Maybe not, Jesus, is he different in degree or in kind? That's a real sharp one. It just made, it's interesting that he seems to be drawing people in, whereas if you could hear almost those same metaphysical statements from someone in the liberal tradition, and where's the meat to this? And for me, I think that's the thing that's sort of kept me more, away from kind of the liberal side, I guess. Kind of kept me grounded in the orthodox.
Small orthodox.
Yeah, small or orthodox. I went up to Berkeley once to the Graduate Theological Union there, and for an event, and it was weird, man. I mean, there was representatives from extreme womanist theology, queer theology, all of these different things. I mean, and it was such a strange strange experience to be literally the most conservative guy in the room, and to know that, like, wow, it's like I'm in a crowd where if you were to make a statement, a classic Orthodox statement that Christ is fully divine, fully human, I mean, people would raise eyebrows at you, or make any sort of ultimate claim for Christianity. That I think that's the big one now.
Well, and I find myself in places like that sometimes, and I'm just fascinated by the language, because what the whole thing winds up becoming is a whole series of circumlocutions to avoid anything, especially avoid any specific Christian language. And you can't really have a prayer. That gets a little too much. So we're going to have an invocation. Well, there you go. There's your $5 word instead of a prayer. Kind of an invocation. Well, what exactly are you invoking? Do you ever look up the source of that word? And so then, and we're going to be present, and we're going to be mindful, and we're going to be, and it's almost, John McWhorter has a wonderful riff on racism where he says, all these people at Aspen, they're just so, we've not yet arrived. And so John McWhorter says, well, can you tell me what arriving means? I mean, I can kind of think of a soundtrack for it, but can you actually describe it? And that's exactly it. The liturgy becomes sort of a soundtrack, but it's and what I really liked about C.S. Lewis is C.S. Lewis, basically made the comment that, here's the thing about reality. Real things are hard. And you get the sense listening to some of these groups that it's all just going to float away. It's going to float away because, my goodness, don't dare say anything that would attach it to any historical reference, anything that's ever happened in the world.
Exactly.
So just give me a drug and let me, So, but again, the fascinating thing about Peterson is that's not Peterson.
Right.
Peterson, when you read 12 Rules, it's very practical in a sense, where this is how to do it. So, and that's where I see him as different from, say, he wouldn't be offended if you said he was like a classical liberal theologian, because he'd put classical liberal and assert that politically. But I really don't think he has. I don't know if he has any idea, if you would say liberal theology, whether he would be able to frame that conceptually in terms of the history of theology. It's just not what he studied.
I don't think he would.
So, and that's why, it was so funny, because he lands at Liberty University, and I thought, well, that's a funny place to go. And then he's trying to get into Cambridge Divinity School, and I thought, well, that's a funny place to go. Where are you gonna do next? Go to Salt Lake City and hang with the Mormons? I don't know. Do you understand this theological landscape at all?
Well, look, to me, the Liberty episode, I mean, it was wonderful. I loved it. But to me, that really indicated, I'm like, oh, man, you have no idea what American Christianity looks like. I mean, that's like so far right that, but I guess for a lot of people, I mean, that is when they think of your standard evangelical. I mean, they think Jerry Falwell, and that is a very big school. And it has a lot of influence.
Yeah. And I got a lot of mail from people after that basically saying, and I very much accept what they say. They say, well, liberty is don't pay too much attention to the political stuff, that there are a lot of good professors there, and there are a lot of good professors there.
Sure.
And I'm sure there are a lot of fine students there, so I don't want to demean them, but it's just funny, because I don't think that he doesn't have a map. He's got a map of meaning, but he doesn't have a map of the American Christian or the world Christian landscape. And but also I don't know that he has any, I haven't heard him articulate any goal that would intersect with that map in any way. So, I just listened to he released the Sydney talk where he talks about belief in God, and it's interesting. So of course he goes after the Marxist, and then he goes into his other stuff, and it's like, well, it's very original.
It is. It is.
Which is what makes it so fun, which is why part of me wasn't terribly disappointed when he didn't get a chance to go to Cambridge, because I thought, well, I was afraid Cambridge might spoil the Exodus lectures if he ever does them.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think that, that's one of his big strengths, is that he is not tied to any sort of either a dogmatic tradition or even a scholarly tradition. I mean, he would go to Cambridge to learn about Exodus, and he would spend his whole time trying to, study which source is what from Exodus. And I think I agree with you. I think it would have taken away sort of the mythological creativity.
Yeah.
I think it may have helped his exegetical skills in some way, but overall, yeah, I think you could have done more harm than good, maybe.
Yeah. But no, I think your main point here is very true. He's and so it's so hard to locate him. So part of him is kind of a classical liberal theologian. Yeah. Part of him is mythopoetic. There's a piece of that in terms of classical liberalism, because they caught that too.
Yes.
But he, there's the Jungian side of him is, that's a whole nother thing. And then, but he acts like an evangelical, where he's barnstorming around the world, talking to concert halls.
Yep.
And, it's so funny too, because he, the one time he visited an Orthodox church with his wife, that at least it was talked about, and she really liked it. And he thought, why doesn't he go to church? He can't sit still. Orthodox service, you're going to be in there 2 hours, work through that liturgy,
and stand the whole time.
That's right. Jordan's going to be fidgeting, and that's too much fun.
It is. I had one thing that made me think of. Let's see, what was it? Jordan Peterson, Orthodox. It just slipped my mind. But if it comes back, I'll let you know.
Oh, you don't have notes in front of you? Lots of people have notes.
Oh, I do. But
okay.
something that you said that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't mean to give you a hard time. I tease sometimes, and people get. I'm not going to name any names here, but.
Yes.
See, I'm from New Jersey. I tease people like.
Sure.
If I'm being too nice, then maybe you better, just,
they're like, what's going on?
Yeah, what's wrong, Paul? You're way too nice. So
yeah. Oh well, now I remember what it was. You mentioned his Jungian side. I think I've heard you talk about it, but I think when Jordan, when you see his influence from Jung, a lot of times I think it's impossible to miss that. The influence of Jung's father and the kind of Calvinist tradition. I mean, when I've heard Jordan Peterson say, I remember the first time I heard him say, like, well, God is whatever is at your highest, your hierarchy of values. I thought, like, man, that's like a classical Reformed, I mean, he could be quoting Calvin there or Augustine.
Yeah.
And, I think, we can't lose the fact that, Jung was a Reformed pastor's son.
That's right.
And that colored it.
And a liberal Reformed pastor's son. I mean, liberalism was already well underway in the middle of the 19th century, and Jung's father, not a very happy pastor either.
No.
And Jung, and I think part of I get into trouble every time I talk about Jung. Jung too. There's a way in which Jung's enterprise can also be seen in the light of this saving Christianity movement. I mean, he too he's not a theologian, he's a psychologist, but he too is in many ways part of that whole project of we need to save the church from modernity, because this can no longer be believed, but we have so much sunk costs in Christianity at how many different levels as a civilization that it needs to be reformulated in order to be saved. And I have, so I was just did a video, before I did these conversations today. I'm sort of between Vervaeke and Peugeot on this, which is kind of sort of where Peterson is too, in that I don't know that we can simply go back, and I also don't think that the Orthodox are, I mean, they're using YouTube. The Orthodox in America are amazingly media savvy. I'm very impressed by what they're doing. Yep. So you can't really fully go back. If you're going to engage this world, you have to engage those issues. So, and then the question is, well, how and what to keep, and what needs updating or nuancing, and that's always been the case in the church. Paul and Barnabas go to Antioch, and well, gosh, what do we do with these people? They're Gentiles. And Peter goes and to see Cornelius, and Paul sees Lydia and just these women outside of Philippi. And so the church is always being forced to adapt. And the scary thing is that it gets a lot of things wrong. And it's usually over the very long haul that orthodoxy and heterodoxy get worked out. And so the challenges we face in our lifetime, we will mess up. And heresy is almost always a product of churches' missional engagements with frontiers it's never been exposed to. And it takes a while to work through. So we're in that process now. It continues to be a live process.
Yeah, it does. I think maybe some of the promise with Jordan Peterson is that he is opening up the doors for those conversations to happen. I think it's, it kind of goes back to that. It's always that tension you get between your natural theology and theology of revelation, right? God number one, God number two. How far can human intellect go? And I think it can open up doors we need to. Of course, every theologian of revelation believes in reason and being informed. I mean, Karl Barth, who you mentioned earlier, right? I can just, as I listen to Jordan Peterson talk about him, I can hear rolling because he is so focused on we don't know God at all except Jesus Christ. That word, everything else, is submissive to that, and I believe that. But what I've also found is, there is a place for this natural theology, because it is oftentimes the place where people start. And you go along, Paul talk in Athens, the unknown God, say, hey, I'm going to proclaim this to you, and open up that door to revelation. So yeah, I think that what Jordan Peterson's doing has a lot of potential for engaging people, especially men, in the church. And I think that it's a good door opener, and that allows better conversations to happen. And then, but it's something that liberal theology, I think, would like to have done, but just never could do.
Yeah, it's, well, we should, over on the side of the church that has always resisted liberal theology, we should, in a sense, give them their due. It sort of reached its heyday in the Cold War, but there are many fine Christians that remain in mainline churches, it's, and yeah, it's tough to work through. And, even as you mentioned, a school like Fuller. So Rich Mao, of course, was president of Fuller. He was, he was a philosopher from Calvin College. I had a course with Rich Mao when he taught at Calvin.
Oh, cool.
And Rich Mao continues to show up at CRC events because he's kind of like favorite speaker. But, and of course, Mark Laberton, another wonderful guy.
Mm-hmm.
Fuller always sort of tries to stay at that edge of order and chaos when it comes to.
It does.
And that's, that in a sense is, a certain wing of evangelicalism, the kind that doesn't get defined that way in the newspaper so much, but it's, and neo-evangelicalism, as Molly Wortham called it in her really fine book on evangelicalism. Billy Graham, for all of he really tried to bring, in a sense, these things together. And a lot of what Christianity Today does, Calvin College has often tried to do is say, we need to continue to think and do theology and find out where these lines are and work those problems. So, and I, for me, I like you welcomed Jordan Peterson's contribution and continue to welcome it. But I have to process that through myself and find out, where I agree with him, where I disagree with him, what I think is helpful, what challenges me to think in some new ways. But Jonathan Peugeot and his last question and answer, I thought, said something quite well. He talked about, he says there's sort of a new openness right now about talking about some of these things. And I think Jordan had a big part in creating that new openness. Mm-hmm. And, I sense that with, whereas John Vervaeke isn't speaking from, a Christian tradition, although, I think he did grow up in a church, at least part of his growing up years. So Christianity is unknown to him. But there is sort of in this new internet YouTube space, an environment where we can talk to each other, which to me is hugely welcoming. And I had a meetup last night, and a young man stayed late, and we talked, and he still sort of considers himself an atheist. And he just was, so you guys are doing this in a church. And I said, I've always wanted the church to be the kind of place where we can have these conversations. Mm-hmm. And that's been difficult in a lot of evangelical spaces because of the fear of opening the door, and a well-found fear. Mm-hmm. But we have to talk to each other. Yeah. Even though missional movements are the seed beds of heresy, we can't stop doing mission.
Right. Exactly.
And so we keep trusting, the whole business is trusting Jesus. So trust Jesus, for Pete's sake.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. And, I think, risk is part of, and that's one thing Jordan Peterson's really helped me with is taking more risk. I did the self-authoring thing. I did the, I'm high in openness, but I'm not a risk taker. Yeah. But that idea of we figure things out by talking. Yeah. Which a lot of times in churches, you get that exact opposite is we are going to give you the words to speak, which is an interesting tension to live with, because what Peterson objects to, being told what he can and cannot say, is something that is part of the Christian heritage.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Yeah. And when the church just becomes a purveyor of propaganda. Mm-hmm. And I've been fortunate in that I've always, my father's church, my father was also very high in openness, and it was a church in a very missional place in that, and as this church is here in Sacramento. So these are places where you're always dealing with things that are a little off the map.
Yeah.
And so, and other people understand that, so they give you a little leeway. And
Yep.
I'm just happy to be able to open the doors and have all kinds of people come in, and we have meaningful conversations, and we take it from there. And again, I mean, I tell people this, I say, if you believe you're going to trust Jesus for your afterlife, well, shouldn't you kind of trust him for your life too?
Yeah.
And that tends to be what a lot of Christians do. They're like, well, I trust Jesus is going to take me home when I die. Well, good. Do you trust him before he takes you home?
Yeah.
That's really hard, and that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yes.
So, I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, we got a few more minutes yet. What do you got on your list that you really got to cover?
I think we covered it quite a bit, really. I'm trying to figure out what to do with this. I think in my future, I'm looking at actually going back and doing a PhD in theology.
Really?
Yeah.
Where? Do you have any idea yet?
I think my first choice would actually be Baylor University. Yeah. And so I'd like to maybe go somewhere like Duke or something, but I don't know if I could get in there. Could try, but I'd like to integrate some of these things into that course of study, because I think it's an interesting cultural moment that we're living in, and the effect that he's having on the church, on men and women in general. So it's been that's kind of on the horizon for me.
Okay.
His whole experience with the academy and kind of what happened to him and what's been happening to a lot of other professors definitely gives me a little bit of pause there.
Yeah.
I mean, even as you probably know, in a lot of even Christian universities, you do run up against some of that ideology that has taken out a lot of other professors. So that's been kind of, I guess that maybe that's the reason why I'm investing my time right now learning how to do carpentry and paint and stuff like that. It's always good to have a fallback.
Do you know how many PhD? Do you know how many people have PhDs in theology and don't use it for their jobs?
Oh, I know. I know. And I planned on doing this for a long time. Then I kind of gave up on that. I was like, no, that probably won't work out. But listening to Jordan Peterson has, kind of motivated me to say, hey, aim at that. Just aim, see if you'll hit it.
If you can do it, go for it.
Yeah.
That's, I think it's a fine thing, and you'll learn stuff that there's no other way you could learn it.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah. So.
Well, this has been fun, Brandon.
Yeah, it's been great. Appreciate it. And
I will send you this. I will send you the recording, and you can let me know what you want to do with it.
Yeah, go ahead and post it if you want.
All right. Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Brandon.
Hey, good talking to you.
Take care. And if you're ever down in Sacramento, you can keep a look on the meetup thing, because I think you'd have fun. I think you'd have fun dropping in. You're not that far. You're just a little bit east of Lake Tahoe, so
yeah,
you're not crazy far. So
no, we go back to the Bay Area sometimes to see friends, so we pass through there.
So there's a link in the notes on all my videos to the Sacramento Jordan Peterson meetups thing. So if you just click that, you'll get notifications when I set new meetings. And actually, we're doing 2 Sundays from yesterday. We're helping start a new group in Nevada City, which is up by Grass Valley, which is actually closer to you than Sacramento is.
Cool.
If you want to check that out, you can check that out, because she's a woman where she's been driving down here about an hour and some, and she's like, this is a far drive. I said, well, start one by yourself. It might be small, but we'll help you start it. So, so we'll see.
Right on. Well, cool. That's exciting.
All right, Brandon, well, you take care.
All right, you too.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.